Hi everyone, I'm Hoodie Angel Brandon. You know, when we like something, we want more of it. We crave it. When we find a manga we like, we look forward to an anime based off of it. If we love a book, we wait with bated breath for a movie based on it that can live up to the original story and not completely suck and end as a colossal disaster like the His Dark Materials trilogy, which will never know justice. But yes, we look for more interpretations of our favorites. And this is true also with games. When I stumbled on a manga adaptation of Phantom Brave, well, I was ecstatic. I love Phantom Brave. I thought, why not take a look at the manga with all of you? Background information. Phantom Brave, Ivoire Monogatari is a manga adaptation to the criminally underrated Phantom Brave for PS2. From what little I could gather, it was released on January 10th, 2004, which is actually 12 days before the actual game was released in Japan. Further, it hasn't ever had any actual release outside of Japan, which is kind of understandable for a manga based off a relatively obscure game. It is a single volume consisting of 8 chapters. That's about all I could find about this. I don't think most people outside hardcore fans of this game even know this thing exists, to be honest. It's as if it were a phantom. I've already reviewed the original game, so you may want to check that out. I will be summarizing the key points again here though. If for some reason you do decide to read it without having played the game, beware that it does spoil some major plot points. With that out of the way, let's get started. Story and characters. As an adaptation of the original Phantom Brave game, this manga follows a young girl named Morona. She can speak to and interact with spirits known as phantoms, who are sort of trapped between the living realm and the afterlife, or something. IDK, going just off the manga here, it doesn't do a great job of explaining it. Morona is accompanied by her companion, a phantom called Ash, who worked alongside her parents as a chroma, or contractor is what they're calling them here. In fact, now seems as good a time as any to point out that it doesn't really explain a lot of the terms and concepts well. This is fine if you're already familiar with the game, but if you're just picking this up casually, I'd imagine it to be rather confusing. Anyways, as I was saying, it follows Morona as she works as a contractor, with Ash's support in an attempt to raise enough money to buy the island they live on. Just like the game! Also like the game, Morona is often the target of hatred and prejudice as a result of her powers, making her an outcast. This, alongside her kind personality, often result in her getting taken advantage of. Even so, Morona does her best.
Do my best!
To help her clients and put a smile on their faces, caring more about their happiness than her own. This is important because Morona's character kinda hinges on how she can maintain a kind and cheerful demeanor in the face of prejudice and hatred. This adaptation shows some of Morona and Ash's various misadventures as they go about their work, hitting a few of the key early game plot points, but with various twists, such as Walnut being in possession of Putty rather than Ringmaster Ham, or Cauldron the Island Collector and the journey to the Island of Evil being omitted entirely. There are little hints, wisps if you will, of a grander, overarching plot, but nothing ever really comes of it. While some of the characters have been left out, most of the key ones are here. Walnut, Raphael, Putty, Castile, and even Mr. Canary. It actually does a good job of representing a lot of the main cast from the game, given the limited space to devote to each of them. And it even does a good job of keeping them loyal to their canon personality. Wait, why did you? This is Sprout, strongest of the 9 Swords of Ivoire, wielder of the Sacred Blade, the most BA 85-year-old man ever, capable of going toe-to-toe with the Lord of Darkness itself. Blasphemy incarnate, Dark Eborius! And he's been reduced to what? A senile old pervert stereotypical of every old man in a manga ever? This is unacceptable! The gravest sin, the greatest offense. Not only did you squander a fantastic character ripe with backstory and dimension, you replaced it with this trite garbage! Alright, I need to explain just who Sprout was to give an idea of how bad this interpretation of his character is. Without spoiling the specifics, he was known as the strongest warrior in Ivoire and carried a sacred blade. But he also had a family who he dearly loved. When monsters attacked his village, he lost everything, leading him to spiral into despair, anger, and vengeance. And now he's this. Okay, calm down a little. Ignoring this travesty, it does give some cool characterization of Marona and Ash that you don't see in the main game. And most importantly, Marona is still the same adorable sweetie pie. So the characters are mostly good, with one really bad seed. And a decent, but not fantastic story. Let's take a look at how this thing is presented, before my blood pressure rises any further. Art style and pacing. Now this art style, it's actually pretty alright. Cute and charming, good amount of expressiveness. I don't have a problem with this. Good on ya. The characters are recognizable to who they're supposed to be. It's a bit on the simple side, not the most detailed, but it works. And some of these faces are pretty good. Now the rest of this, it's short, which wouldn't be so bad on its own, but there's not enough space to flesh out the world, the characters, and the story. As a result, all of them are only touched upon. It's so shallow and lifeless, more so than one of Marona's Phantoms. The original game was a lot longer, leaving a lot more time for all of this to be developed. But here, it's obviously not. Perhaps most insulting, the author had a copy of the game, and seems to have played it enough to reference some major early game plot points, but just didn't bother to actually try and get details right. I understand artistic license and having to fit it into constraints such as how many chapters and pages they had to work with, but it barely touches on the main plot of the games. But had half a chapter devoted to Marona buying a breast expansion machine? What is this? Lastly, worth noting, the base game had a pretty good sense of humor. This adaptation shares it, though it seems to focus more on that than some other, more important aspects of the game. Also, half of it is perverted humor, which can get a bit annoying. You can probably guess my overall thoughts at this point, but let's go over them all so we can wrap this thing up. Verdict. There are plenty of games out there with manga adaptations, and while I haven't read a lot of them, most of them I did read are pretty decent. Nothing stellar, but not really bad. But this one is downright offensive to me as a fan of the game. Like, it's just got so many flaws, completely disregards huge chunks of the story, canon, and lore of the source material, and completely butchered Sprout. The other characters were okay, but not fantastic. They felt a lot more one-dimensional than in the game, in part due to each one's limited time in the reworked story, and it's certainly not enough to make up for the travesty that is Ivoire's greatest swordsman. I can't really recommend it to anyone but a fan of the game, as it relies on being familiar with the source material. Yet, at the same time, as a fan, I was pretty disappointed by its watered-down presentation of the original story and characters, and some of it was altered to the point that it just made me upset. It doesn't really appeal to pre-existing fans or the casual outsider. It's just kind of stuck in limbo. It's not downright terrible, not the worst thing I've ever read for sure, but I can't say it's really worth anyone's time. It fails to add anything meaningful to the experience that is Phantom Brave, that the original game didn't already offer. I mean, at the end of the day, you can read it for free online, so you're not really losing out on anything aside from maybe an hour or two of your time. But that's an hour you could spend doing something else, like actually playing Phantom Brave. Even for fans of Phantom Brave, I can't really recommend it because it's just not that good. Only the most hardcore of fans might be interested, and only to say that you've read it. And let's be honest, if you're that much of a fan, you've probably already read it.
Marona, you don't deserve this. You deserve better than this. You deserve a good manga. You deserve an anime, keychains, plush dolls and collectibles. You should be in Smash Bros. Well, okay, yeah, I can't justify that. But you don't deserve this abomination.
Marona! You deserve justice, Marona!